All right, everyone. Hi, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're at in the world. Thank you very much for joining us here at the webinar for May here at Peakon. Those of you who are new to the webinar, my name is Patrick, and if I don't know you, it's very nice to meet you virtually. And this is my buddy Michael.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you again for taking the time to join us, and Michael's going to kick it off.
Great, thanks, Patrick. First, let's have a quick run through of the format that we use on these webinars. Firstly, we like to bring you some learnings from the community here at Peakon, so our customers, or from our own stories. We then go through the latest feature releases, and then finally we look at some of the new research we've been doing here at Peakon into employee engagement and organisational development. Now, for this month, we're going to bring you some stories actually from ourselves around how we understand our own levels of engagement. We're also going to walk you through some of the new features, and one of them is related to this. So we have a very interesting new feature that's based on personal engagement insights, which is something that's never really been done before in the world of measuring and trying to improve engagement. And then finally, we're going to look at some analysis that shows how different levels of the organisation can drive change. So senior leadership, through teams, and actually also through individuals. But first, Patrick, where have you been? You were not around for our last webinar?
I know, I was not. If you guys watched the last webinar, I was in Los Angeles. So first of all, it's good to see you, Michael. You're looking a little sunburned.
Yes. Don't adjust your screens.
Yes.
If you're thinking, why is this all red? We're just
two sunburned redheads.
Yeah.
Yep. So basically, it's incredibly beautiful weather here in Denmark. It has been for the past month. But I was in California, to answer your question. Yeah. I was on the west coast of the U.S. With one of the customer success managers, AP. Those of you who have AP as your CSM, we did a whistle-stop tour of the West Coast. A lot of our customers on the West Coast, we were conducting something called the QBR, which is a quarterly business review. If you don't have QBRs, reach out to your customer success manager and we'll talk to you about doing QBRs. But really great connections with our customers. We started in San Francisco, worked our way down the state. We spent some time in Santa Barbara with some customers and ended up down just north of San Diego with customers. So I was there for about a week. And previous to that, on our last webinar, I was also in California in Los Angeles. So I'm very happy to be back, and it is good to see you.
Lovely. Well, I'm going to Leeds next week to do QBRs, which we all know is far more glamorous than LA.
Yeah, Leeds.
Don't
wow.
get too jealous.
That's all right. I mean, we're just like this international bouncing around the globe. So
That's
good.
going to be great. Okay, so let's get started with the first subject of this webinar. What we're going to talk about here is some of our own stories around when we've become more engaged or when we've understood our own engagement levels in our careers. Mm-hmm. So perhaps, Patrick, you have a story that you were telling me earlier?
Yeah, I do. So as obviously we're an engagement company, right? And being passionate around employee engagement and culture at organizations is very core and central to all of us. And I have just a quick little story that I'll tell you about when I probably have felt the most engaged at an organization. So before I worked at Peakon, I did the bulk of my career in the airline industry, and I worked for Virgin America in the US. And one thing that was a moment in time that still resonates with me today, and I still go back to about feeling extremely engaged and working with colleagues that were very engaged, was back in 2006 when Virgin America was trying to get started as an airline in the US. There were about 100 of us working for the company at that point. And we all started before we had an operating certificate from the US government. Yeah. So we were very confident that we were going to get our operating certificate. And we, unfortunately, after our first attempt at getting it, it was declined. And that was a very difficult time for us because we were all these super passionate people, very engaged, but for multiple reasons, we were at the start declined. So we had these 100 people that would just not take no for an answer, and that were incredibly passionate and engaged for working for Virgin America, that we took to the streets of San Francisco, and we wanted to bring the voice of what Virgin America was to the world, and to tell people about why they should support Virgin America becoming an airline. So really, I feel that 100 of us truly engaged employees. We had an incredible leader, and we really were just incredibly passionate about having it work, that we turned that around and we ended up getting our operating certificate. And it was a defining moment in my career because I really realized how a small group of engaged people can make a difference, and how change happens at an organization and outside of an organization through the passion that people have. So I think about that every day, honestly, when I'm in particular working with customers on engagement. So how about you?
I think for me, I was thinking perhaps, I mean, it's not just out and out engagement, but I try to think of something where I learned why I felt a certain way, or why I acted in a certain way in a business. And I used to have a manager who was exceptionally good at trying to teach me new skills and had a lot of good ideas for kind of creative projects, but was also super busy. And we would kind of initiate these projects and we would go ahead with them. And then, you know, I was on board with doing them for sure, but the feedback I got was never really sort of informational, and never really made me understand why exactly something was good or bad. I knew that the manager was like, oh great, like pat on the back, but actually the result of that in the long term led to me essentially just doing what I thought the manager wanted, rather than really engaging in like how I could express myself sort of through these projects. And then, you know, the kind of the impact on the output is that you sort of get a product that's, it's fine, right, but it just stagnates, and then in the long term you just sort of get bored of things, right? And it was that difference between something that was good versus something that could have been great if I'd have really like bought into it myself. Probably at the time I actually didn't think like that, right, because I didn't know much about engagement myself. But now thinking back, you're like, oh, okay, that explains it. It's autonomy, it's the way feedback's given, all those things. But good. And that actually segues quite nicely into some of the new features that we've been building here, that we're going to be able to show you now.
It's been another busy month. April was a very busy month, and May has turned out to be just as busy with product features. So
exactly. So just a quick run through. We've got quite a mixture of things. Firstly, some survey poster templates that we're going to be able to send to you. The post-first survey feedback journey, which is an entirely new thing we're offering. Personal engagement insights, reintroduction emails, an update to the survey itself and the progress bar, and an Okta integration. So the first one of these is probably the least high-tech feature that we've ever made, but will hopefully be quite popular. You can actually go and ask your CSM now for these posters. So when you're, you know, if you're running perhaps quarterly surveys, or you're new to Peakon and you just want to make sure people are familiar with, you know, this tool that they're going to be using and the surveys coming to improve your participation, these should help. You can adjust these posters and stick them up around the office.
And this was directly from customers too. They were asking for us to help them with some marketing collateral in the organization. And you can probably see them up on the walls behind us here at the office.
The next thing is actually, you can see this sort of GIF rolling here. What this is about is what you could call the feedback journey. So the idea is that after your first survey, rather than just getting the standard sort of thank you for your feedback screen, we're now going to give people the option to kind of see a little bit of the process of where the feedback is going. The idea with this is that we kind of increase trust in the platform, but also in your process for change. So when people have an idea of where the feedback's going, they know it's not, you know, going to be sat in a sort of PDF on someone's desk that's never going to look at it. This increased transparency also helps to kind of allay these fears around anonymity, right? Because you're giving a lot of feedback through comments that perhaps previously you haven't done, because this is a new tool to you, and you can now see, okay, this is actually what the comments look like on the dashboard. It doesn't have, you know, my name and my face there saying something.
Right.
And this will be coming out soon. We've also kind of taken this idea and the content, and we're going to be putting these into what we call reintroduction emails. So if you're, especially if you're running kind of a pulse survey, but someone sort of drops off and doesn't answer the survey for 3 rounds, then we're going to send these slightly different surveys with emails, with the survey, where we again show you a little bit more about what's going to happen with the feedback. The idea being that perhaps you stopped answering because you didn't believe in the process, or you were worried about anonymity, and this will hopefully solve that. The next is probably the most exciting feature this month, and a really interesting new new approach that we're taking here. The idea here is that after the survey, we're going to give this screen that's about your own personal engagement. And what we're going to show is essentially the driver that you are most satisfied with in terms of how different that is to the benchmark, the ones that you're least satisfied with, and how your engagement is trending over time. The underlying idea behind this is we want people to kind of understand more about the culture that they're part of and what engages them, because nobody wants a job that they hate, right? And if you can give people some information where they can actually drive improvements themselves and start suggesting improvements, this is sort of, it helps the whole organisation from the bottom up. This is a feature that's going to be released next week, and actually we'll just bring up the screen next to show you kind of where you can activate this. And here it is. So this is actually attached to the survey schedules. So perhaps you want to try this in a part of your organisation, or you want to turn it on for the whole organisation, but it's done related to your survey schedules. So when you go into a schedule, in the same place where you could turn on or off the illustrations, you can switch it on here. You can also, with the survey preview, go and have a look at how this is going to look before you switch it on. Actually, this feature will kind of help you do that. So we've changed the way that we indicate progress through the survey. We've always had a progress bar, but people always didn't see it. Yeah. So we've changed it now, and you can actually now jump between questions. And as an admin, if you want to kind of preview the survey, this is pretty helpful because you can just kind of mouse through rather than having to answer all the questions. One of the things that we've added is also the average time remaining, which would be quite good for, especially if you've got a bit of a longer survey, you can see, okay, I've only got 5 minutes left or something like that. And the final thing, a bit more of a technical integration here, if you're using Okta with your HR data, you can now sync that through Peakon with an out-of-the-box integration that we've built. Now, all of these features, as usual, they are going to be summarized on the blog. We write a new blog post the first week of every month. Also, Petros, who runs these webinars, is going to be sending out a message on intercom, so you'll see this in your Peakon dashboard. And now we're going to have a look at the topic that we've chosen for this month's insights and from our data science. The idea here is driving change throughout the organisation. So you've seen with some of the features that we've been launching, we're kind of taking a new approach where we're involving more people essentially in the change process. And this diagram that I'll show you next tries to kind of explain how improvements can be made throughout the organisation and what sort of decisions are made at each level. So if you think back to any engagement survey, the very, very top of it, the summary that was given as a presentation or put out in a PDF, part of it was this executive summary, right? And the main insight was, what's the health of this organisation? Maybe for the CEO, it was like, are the board going to think I'm doing better than my predecessor? But very, very high level, right? Very high level figures on overall engagement. Next comes the part that's always been with engagement surveys, but high level action planning, right? So this will probably be done at kind of business unit or still maybe even executive level, really. And what the thought is, generally, what investment should we make to improve what the company is offering, right? What sort of reward are we offering? What sort of growth opportunities are we offering? But it's all this kind of high level stuff. And when you're thinking about attrition, it's looking at attrition in terms of what have been the key factors that have already made people leave, and what could we kind of fix at a high level, right, to stop that happening in the future, right? But it's not thinking about how can we stop these people leaving in the next week or something, or doing something proactive. I think the next stage, which is where Peakon has probably been the big innovation, has been with these things where you're proactively addressing issues, right? So to do that, the insights have to go from, instead of being very broad, they need to be very local because they need to be related to the manager. And in a sense also to be local, it needs to be continuous because the locality part is also time related, right? It's like you can't sort of increase retention on a team level if your insights are still a year old, especially when it gets down to that lower level, because half the team are going to be different potentially anyway, right? So this is sort of where we've been, and it's more been coaching managers to improve the effectiveness of their team when it's on that level, right? What are the frustrations in how we work together, how we collaborate, how I give feedback, those kind of things, right? The new thing that we're adding that comes with this personal view, I think could be very impactful, because there's a whole, a massive amount of people which, when they start getting a little bit more understanding of their own culture and why they feel the way they do, you can actually engage them in this process of improving, right? And I think then you will end up with these things where you're seeing like tiny improvements in perhaps what people go and look for in the organisation, right? Whether they go and search out different growth opportunities or search out work that actually is more engaging to them. So this was this sort of general pyramid summary, and actually we have some interesting, sort of very exclusive research to share with you for this webinar from Dr. Joe Caney, who's the head of data science here, that supports this and also is just genuinely really fascinating. What Joe has looked into is how do whether the drivers are essentially related to one another. Are they correlated with one another? The reason that we wanted to do that was to try and see, are there groups of drivers that sort of move together? And the reason for that would be that perhaps if there are groups of drivers that move together, we can then sort of bucket things and say, okay, well, these drivers are mostly impacted by the company overall or teams, and this helps the way that we can then provide guidance as through customer success, but also just generally an interesting and a bit of research that's not been done before. So this was actually how, when we looked at the groupings, or when we correlated which drivers are related to one another, they kind of fell into these three groups. And what we've done is we've ranked them here based on at the top one of each group, so organisational fit, management support and accomplishment. These were the ones that were also most correlated with engagement. And we've now got these kind of three groups here. And we're going to now just take you through sort of how these groups, what we think these groups are, and what are the dynamics behind them, why do they move together. The first we can sort of loosely call the company factor. The idea here is that when you've got these drivers like organisational fit, strategy, reward, environment, and even workload, I think these can be most heavily influenced at the senior level of the organisation, and they're mostly impacted by the kind of investment decisions as well that the business makes at a high level. Even workload, I think, shows how culture is so pervasive through organisations, because you tend to see businesses where everyone has a workload problem, right? There might be some teams where it's much worse, but it's just in general, does the business have a culture of, a lot of work, or does it have a culture where they actually invest in kind of slack time for employees to kind of pursue different things? Organisational fit as well, obviously that's a kind of another thing that's related to culture, because it's the values of the business, right? The next one I think we can call the team factor. So these are these drivers that also you would then attribute to the manager, right? So that the manager is the common denominator of the team, but there's also the other parts of this, like peer relationship, freedom of opinions, whether you can voice things to your colleagues, or whether you think they're going to shout you down if they don't agree with what you say. But these are the things that generally we'd probably attribute to the team. And then we have the final category that I've loosely called the project factor, but it's the sort of work in general, I think. The reason I call it project is probably because the way that as a business you may be able to help people and help in these drivers versus the others is that for accomplishment, meaningful work and growth, I think the organisation can actually support and guide individuals to improve in these areas. These are the areas where I think the way to improve accomplishment and especially meaningful work is to give people more freedom in what they choose to work on, essentially. People will search out the things that they find more meaningful. And this, I think, kind of plays into these insights that we now want to start giving to employees, right? You've been a bit less engaged in the last month. Like, oh, okay, I now have a measure of that. What have I been doing for the last month? Oh, I've been working on this, this project that I don't really find very interesting. Maybe I should search out a different type of project. It's also very interesting that growth falls into this category, right? Growth, I think, us in the HR world think of growth as being linked to all these training things and everything formal around growth, but actually growth in this context, it shows that it's driven more by the work that people are doing, right, rather than formal training things. So again, it's about giving the the kind of opportunities and the encouragement and the freedom for people to find ways to grow themselves, right? And none of this is saying that a manager can't influence organisational fit or reward or meaningful work or anything like that. We're just saying that these kind of buckets can be thought of in this way. So that was the main research that we've kind of gone through today. I think it's very interesting, and obviously we'd love to hear your questions about it, whether you have any now, and you can put that in the Q&A, or feel free to write me anytime. My email address is just michael@peakon.com, so it's quite easy to remember.
Yeah, good. Good.
So, yeah, that's a very forward-thinking question from Tony there. So the question is, can the research on company team/manager, individual/project factors be used to display different Peakon driver priorities according to the role of the user? Oh. That is maybe one of the implications of this, right? I think that could be the case, that when you're lower down in the organisation, like a line manager, we weight the priorities a little bit more to focus on these things that we think you might be able to fix. I think this is kind of a bit of research, and maybe the start of, it's also the sort of reason we do this research, because maybe that would be something we would do. I think we can't jump to that now. I think we need to know quite a bit more about it. But I mean, that's a great question. I was actually thinking that myself before we started this.
Very good. That's a good question.
Will personal engagement levels eventually be displayed in an employee portal? Again, so right now, just to be clear, I probably wasn't that clear actually, this screen that we showed with the different drivers and the engagement scores is at the end of the survey. Yeah. Whether we, at some point at Peakon, have a kind of version where employees can go and log in and see these insights, that is also something that may happen in the future. It's not immediately on the roadmap now. But. Mm-hmm.
But I think the fact that getting employees some insights, in particular at the end of the survey, is quite impactful. I mean, we're testing it now internally at Peakon, and we're getting them. And I thought the insights on my own as an employee answering the survey were quite interesting. And it lets me know how many surveys I responded to and how many comments I've left. And
it was genuinely, I learned something about myself for the first time I got it, because I thought that in our team, workload at this time was something that we were all kind of struggling with a bit, but actually it wasn't. It was just me. But anyway, that was interesting. I genuinely wouldn't have known that otherwise. Right? And so this, very much looking forward to getting this out.
Good. If you have any other questions, just click on Q&A at the bottom of the screen and feel free to put them in. If not, we will call it an afternoon, but we'll hang on for just a couple more seconds. As we're waiting for any other potential questions, there'll be an announcement as far as the next webinar for June that will be coming out to all of those that are registered for the webinars. The other thing is, we've been asked by customers recently, in particular when we were in California, AP and I were asked from customers if they could share the link with other people in their organization to watch the webinars. Yes, please do. The more the merrier on the webinars. We think that's great. So we're happy to have as many people on your team join as possible. And for those of you on the West Coast that I know, or that said that you were watching the webinar, hi, glad to see you.
Thanks for getting up so early.
Thank you for being up early and joining us in Santa Barbara. But all of the recordings as well will be sent to you over the next couple of weeks. Petros will send them out. We edit them a bit and make sure they're easy for you to see. So we'll get them out to you. And there also will be on our website. So just going to peakon.com and going to our blog, it's a great thing to look at anyway. We have a lot of great content on there. Petros does a lot of the content in our marketing team. So a lot of great content in there just to look at on a regular basis, because we're always updating that.
Yeah. So here we go, the next one, 27th of June.
Perfect.
And no more questions today?
I think that's it then. Michael, always a pleasure. Take care of that sunburn, as I will as well. And we will see you all. Thank you again for taking the time with us. And
Not a question, just a compliment. Thank you, Tony, for saying it's a great webinar.
I'm glad you like it, Tony. Hopefully everybody else likes it as well. So thank you, and we'll see you in June. Take care.